Toyota, Honda, and Nissan are facing losses in the tens of billions of US dollars as US import tariffs push vehicle prices higher and disrupt supply chains. As the American auto market undergoes rapid change, are consumers ultimately the ones paying the price for this trade conflict? The 25% import tariff imposed by the United States on automobiles and parts from Japan has severely impacted three major Japanese automakers, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. Toyota is expected to see a 35% drop in profit, approximately $10.7 billion US dollars, for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year. Honda forecasts a 70% decline, leaving profit at 250 billion yen, roughly $1.7 billion US dollars. Nissan has announced 20,000 job cuts and the closure of 7 plants due to a $4.5 billion loss. Car prices in the United States have risen by $3,000 to $4,200 US dollars per vehicle, particularly in the compact segment. Japanese automakers' R&D centers, operating in collaboration with US universities, now face the risk of closure, impacting thousands of engineers and students. The estimated total loss for Japan's auto industry could reach 25 billion US dollars annually, while American consumers face immediate consequences in the form of higher vehicle prices and fewer product choices. The challenges facing Toyota, Honda, and Nissan in the US market have had wide-reaching effects on the American economy. Nissan has announced plans to cut 20,000 jobs globally, representing 15% of its workforce, and to shut down 7 of its 17 manufacturing facilities. Toyota and Honda together operate 18 plants across 13 states, employing more than 55,000 workers in the United States. Small car prices in the U.S. have already risen by an average of 18 to 25% due to reduced supply and rising costs. This makes it increasingly difficult for American consumers, especially those in the middle and lower income brackets, to afford new vehicles. Moreover, R&D centers established between Japanese automakers and U.S. universities are under threat of closure, potentially displacing thousands of engineers and students. The estimated annual loss for Japan's auto industry due to U.S. tariffs remains at 25 billion US dollars. The decline in production and investment affects not only Japanese automakers, but also disrupts the broader supply chain and employment landscape in the United States, posing risks to the long-term stability of the U.S. automotive sector. Trade relations between the United States and Japan are facing unprecedented tensions, as the Japanese government firmly refuses to sign any trade agreement unless the 25% tariff on Japanese automobile imports is lifted. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is under significant pressure from domestic businesses and the Liberal Democratic Party to protect Japan's automotive sector, a cornerstone of the nation's export economy. In this context, automakers such as Toyota, Honda, and Nissan are redirecting their investments toward alternative markets, including Southeast Asia, Europe, and India, to reduce exposure to the U.S. market. For instance, Toyota is considering increasing production of the RAV4 at its Kentucky plant to offset the impact of tariffs. The estimated annual loss for Japan's auto industry remains at 25 billion US dollars. This decline in production and investment not only affects Japanese automakers, but also has negative implications for supply chains and employment in the United States, posing long-term challenges for the stability of the U.S. automotive industry. Not as loud as the U.S., not as aggressive as China, yet Canada is quietly building a multi-hundred-billion-dollar electric vehicle battery empire. How is this nation positioned to overtake Detroit and become North America's EV battery hub? Canada is rapidly emerging as a global EV battery production center, with total investments now exceeding $174 billion, surpassing even Detroit, the traditional heart of the American auto industry. Volkswagen is building a massive gigafactory in Ontario with a production capacity of 90 gigawatt-hours per year, enough to power 1 million EVs. The total investment? around $14.8 billion, with 13 billion Canadian dollars coming from the Canadian government. Stellantis and LG Energy Solution are investing over 5 billion Canadian dollars in a facility in Windsor, expected to create 2,500 jobs. Northvolt is constructing a 7 billion Canadian dollars plant in Quebec, with a 60 GWh per year capacity and 3,000 new jobs. These mega projects are generating thousands of high-tech jobs in Ontario and Quebec, giving locals access to advanced manufacturing and R&D careers and reducing dependence on traditional industries. But Canada isn't just assembling batteries, it's mining critical minerals like lithium and cobalt and investing in refining and recycling. For example, Recyclico has developed recycling technology capable of recovering up to 98% of battery metals. This integrated approach is helping Canada establish a full clean energy career pipeline, spanning raw materials to high-end manufacturing, while stimulating regional economic growth. Canada holds free trade agreements with major economies, including the US and Mexico via USMCA, the European Union through CETA, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, and CPTPP countries like Australia and Vietnam. Thanks to these agreements and generous government investment incentives, major automakers like Ford, GM, Volkswagen, and Stellantis have shifted EV battery and component production to Canada. This strategic move allows them to qualify for U.S. tax breaks under the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, while ensuring stable North American supply chains. Canada is taking on a central role in North America's EV battery supply chain, with production capacity to support over 2 million electric vehicles annually. Meanwhile, the U.S. is struggling to secure key minerals like lithium and nickel, making it increasingly reliant on partners like Canada. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act encourages the use of battery materials from FTA countries, placing Canada in a highly favorable position. As China continues to dominate global lithium-ion battery production, accounting for roughly 77% of capacity, Canada is working to build a more secure and independent EV supply chain. To reduce reliance on Chinese imports, Canada has joined international initiatives like the Minerals Security Partnership, alongside the US, EU, Japan, and South Korea. Canada is also investing in alternative technologies, including cobalt-free batteries and advanced recycling. Companies like Recyclico are leading the charge, with innovative processes that recover up to 98% of metals from used batteries, critical for sustainability and long-term cost control.
Canada is severing vital ties with the United States, from energy and security to politics. What is happening after the statement? Canada is the 51st state. And why are citizens calling for national self-defense? Manitoba Hydro, one of Canada's major energy providers, has terminated 2 electricity export contracts to the United States equivalent to 500 megawatts per day, following former President Donald Trump's announcement of a 25% tariff on Canadian energy and goods. The redirected power will now serve domestic regions such as Nunavut, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. The Manitoba provincial government stated this move is part of an effort to reclaim energy sovereignty amid ongoing trade dependence on the U.S. However, the decision may leave Manitoba Hydro facing up to CAD $25 billion in debt, prompting the company to propose an 11% electricity rate increase, starting in 2026 to offset revenue. Losses residents in Manitoba and Ontario may face increased financial pressure as electricity prices rise during a time of climbing living costs. The exit from the U.S. energy market also presents long-term questions for Canada regarding energy security and export diversification. Amid rising trade and political tensions between Canada and the United States, former President Trump has repeatedly referred to Canada as the 51st state. This rhetoric has raised concerns about bilateral relations and Canada's national security. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly rejected President Trump's remarks, emphasizing the importance of defending Canada's sovereignty and independence. He also called for increased defense spending and reduced reliance on the U.S. in security matters. Both the Liberal and Conservative parties have expressed support for strengthening national defense and diversifying international partnerships. In Canada's Parliament, some members questioned whether NATO would intervene in the event of a conflict between Canada and the U.S. Under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO responds only when a member is attacked by an external force. As such, a dispute between two NATO members may not prompt intervention, raising concerns about Canada's independent defense capabilities. Many Canadians have expressed anxiety about the future of the country and its relationship with the United States. Citizens are urging the government to strengthen ties with other international partners and invest in national defense to safeguard sovereignty and security. Canadians are increasingly aware of the need to reduce dependence on the United States and strengthen national autonomy. U.S. tariff policies and controversial statements by President Trump have fueled a wave of nationalism and a call for broader international engagement. A survey by Angus Reid found that 91% of Canadians support reducing reliance on the U.S., while 90% oppose the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state. In response, many citizens have joined Buy Canadian campaigns, boycotted American products, and canceled travel to the U.S. apps like MapleScan. And Buy Canadian have grown in popularity, helping consumers identify local products. On the political front, Canadian parties are advocating for increased defense spending and stronger relations with international partners. However, efforts to diversify markets and reduce U.S. dependence face several challenges, including high defense costs and geographic distance from alternative trade partners. Car prices are rising, jobs are gradually disappearing, and Americans are struggling in the midst of a shifting economic landscape. What is happening to the auto industry, once the pride of the United States? Tariffs and protectionist trade policies have driven production costs sharply higher, pushing the price of American-made vehicles to record levels. According to Edmunds, by early 2025, the average price of a new car has surpassed $50,000 USD, while used vehicles are nearing $32,000 USD. With incomes failing to keep pace, many consumers are left with no choice but to hold on to older cars, even as maintenance costs continue to rise. Cox Automotive reports that a standard oil change, once around $50 USD, now exceeds $100 USD. Hourly wage earners and those on fixed incomes are bearing the brunt of this burden, particularly as broader living costs, from groceries to gasoline, rise in tandem with the new wave of tariffs. McKinsey notes that 75% of American consumers have shifted to buying cheaper goods, primarily food, due to tightening household budgets. At the same time, unemployment is spreading. The manufacturing sector is seeing a jobless rate of 5.2%. Construction has shed 34,000 jobs, and agriculture has experienced a 3.8% reduction in its workforce. These losses stem from rising raw material costs, declining export demand, and widespread order cancellations, all of which are forcing families to cut back on spending, weakening purchasing power across the broader economy. As American car prices rise and deliveries slow due to parts shortages, Japanese and Korean automakers are gaining ground, thanks to competitive pricing and more agile supply chains. In 2024, Toyota captured 12.5% of the U.S. market. Hyundai Kia held 10.2%, and Honda accounted for 8.1%. These vehicles are known for their durability and fuel efficiency, qualities especially valued amid the steep increase in fuel prices, driven by new import tariffs. Hyundai has announced plans to invest $21 billion USD by 2028 to build electric vehicle and steel manufacturing facilities, expected to create an additional 100,000 jobs and stimulate regional economies. In contrast, many American automakers have been forced to scale back production due to rising costs, leading to widespread layoffs. This has reduced consumer access to domestic models, while further pushing up the price of American-made cars. The shift toward Japanese and Korean vehicles also reflects a broader trend, a trend toward more frugal consumer behavior. With U.S. economic growth projected to slow to 1.4% in 2025, down from 2.2% previously, according to McKinsey, many Americans are adjusting their spending habits in anticipation of leaner times. The 25% import tariff has driven up car prices by an average of 13.5%, or roughly $6,400 USD per new vehicle. This price spike not only strains consumers, but also directly affects manufacturing and exports. Ford has halted exports of the F-150, Mustang, and Bronco to China in response to retaliatory tariffs of 150%. Stellantis has laid off 900 workers across 5 plants, while Volvo has announced job cuts ranging from 550 to 800 positions. Current trade policies are weakening the U.S. auto industry, leading to declining revenues, job losses, and reduced access to domestic vehicles for American consumers. Without timely adjustments, U.S. market share for American-made cars could fall below 40% within the next 5 years. The inflationary pressure driven by tariffs is also spreading to other sectors. In agriculture, the unemployment rate surged to 12% in March 2025, the highest in years. This reflects the broader, cascading impacts on the overall economy and the daily lives of millions of Americans. American farmers are enduring a brutal economic fallout from trade wars with exports, collapsing production costs, soaring, and no solutions in sight. Can the U.S. agriculture sector survive this disaster? Sorghum exports to China have dropped 95%. In just 2 months of 2025, U.S. sorghum exports plummeted from 1.4 million tons to just 78,000 tons compared to the previous year. China once bought 90% of U.S. sorghum, but the market has vanished almost overnight. Other major crops like soybeans, corn, and wheat are also suffering, with prices falling and stockpiles growing. This sharp decline in demand is leaving U.S. farmers with millions of tons of unsold crops in silos, significantly hurting cash flow. The lack of buyers is pushing family-owned farms to the brink of extinction, especially as prices continue to plummet with no market alternatives in sight. China has raised tariffs to over 125% on a broad range of U.S. agricultural products, including soybeans, pork, corn, cotton, and dairy. In addition, the EU has also imposed 25% tariffs on key U.S. farm exports, like soybeans and processed pork, in retaliation for U.S. steel tariffs. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Russia are now filling the gaps left by the U.S., signing long-term trade deals that are shifting global supply chains. Permanently, farmers are seeing their once dominant positions in global markets erode with tariffs, pricing U.S. goods out of major markets like China. The agricultural sector faces long-term structural losses that will be hard to recover from. American farmers are now competing with cheaper products from other nations, leaving them vulnerable to further losses. A New York dairy farmer is facing an additional $2,200 in costs for livestock feed due to new tariffs on Canadian imports. Prices for fertilizers, seeds, and machinery are all on the rise because of tariffs on U.S. trading partners, putting immense pressure on farmers' budgets. Meanwhile, crop prices are falling, creating a double squeeze on U.S. farmers' profits. The escalating costs of production are making it increasingly difficult for farmers to turn a profit. With the prices of essential farm inputs like feed and fertilizer rising, and crop prices declining, many farmers are struggling to cover their basic operating expenses. The economic pressure is mounting, threatening their ability to stay afloat. Rural banks are warning of rising default risks as farmers face growing pressure from unstable crop prices and mounting debt. Many farmers are hesitant to sign contracts due to market volatility, fearing they will grow crops no one will buy. Despite some calls for new bailout packages worth billions, many farmers are voicing a preference for trade deals over government checks. As the financial crisis deepens, farmers are facing a real threat of bankruptcy. The increasing instability in the agricultural sector is putting banks and small rural economies at risk. The proposed government relief packages are seen as short-term solutions, with no clear path to restore long-term market access and stability. The United States and China have entered what may be the most intense phase of confrontation to date. With record-high tariffs, the formation of new alliances, and growing pressure on nations to take sides, prices, employment, and the security of millions are being directly impacted. Is there a constructive resolution on the horizon for this geopolitical struggle? The United States has raised tariffs on electric vehicles from 25% to 100%, and on steel and aluminum to 50%, along with a 70% tariff on numerous other goods. For some products, the average tariff has surged from 54% to as high as 145%. This move is expected to drive up prices for electric vehicles, energy equipment, and electronics in the U.S., directly impacting consumer spending. American businesses that rely on Chinese components may face rising costs, leading to further pricing pressure. At the same time, the U.S. has issued warnings to other nations not to assist China in circumventing tariffs by altering the country of origin. This creates added pressure on exporting countries such as Vietnam. Without transparent traceability, the risk of shipments being held or penalized is significant. The U.S. and India have set a target to raise bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030, up from approximately $192 billion as of March 2025, according to the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR. On April 15, 2025, the two nations signed a preliminary trade agreement as part of the deal. India committed to increasing its imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the U.S. to 10 million tons per year. By 2027, nearly double the current volume, in order to reduce dependence on Chinese and Russian LNG. American citizens in LNG exporting states like Texas and Louisiana may benefit through job creation and rising incomes. In India, residential electricity prices in industrial states are projected to drop from 7.6 to 7.2 rupees per kilowatt hour by 2026. Beginning February 2025, India has imposed a 12% tariff on Chinese steel, an import market worth over $2.4 billion annually, to combat dumping practices. According to Reuters, this measure is expected to protect more than 320,000 jobs in the steel industry. As a result, Indian citizens may benefit from more stable prices in electricity and steel. China has increased subsidies for its steel industry, pushing low-cost steel exports to 94 million tons in 2024. According to Bloomberg, this surge has placed significant pressure on the steel sectors of the US, the EU, and India. Numerous factories have been forced to scale back production, directly affecting more than 320,000 workers. As of January 2025, China has suspended the export of rare earth materials worth $780 million to South Korea. This has impacted more than 37 defense companies, currently collaborating with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. According to Yonhap, several production lines for radar and air defense systems have been temporarily halted due to raw material shortages in Canada. Public concern has grown over data security and electoral transparency, following allegations that China interfered in the national election by spreading disinformation aimed at discrediting 5 candidates known for their tough stance on Beijing, according to CBC. The scale of this interference has been likened to that of Russia's involvement in the U.S. elections in 2016. The primary objective of Trump is to prevent China from using third-party countries to bypass U.S. tariffs. In this context, China has sought to engage Southeast Asian nations but has encountered resistance. Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand have publicly stated they will not serve as transit hubs for Chinese goods. Notably, Vietnam signed a contract to purchase 26 F-16 Block 70-72 fighter jets worth $2.56 billion, marking a significant step forward in defense cooperation with the U.S., according to Defense News. In response, China canceled its order of 48 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft valued at $6.5 billion. However, just 2 weeks later, Indonesia and the Philippines placed orders to purchase the entire batch, as reported by Nikkei Asia. The ongoing U.S.-China trade war is escalating, with bold moves from both sides. China is preparing strong measures, ranging from tariffs to financial strategies, in an effort to reverse the tide of the conflict. But will these actions be enough? The trade war between the U.S. and China intensified further, as U.S. President Donald Trump announced an increase in tariffs on Chinese imports to 145%. This new tariff includes 125% retaliatory tariffs and an additional 20% surcharge that was applied earlier. In response, China announced a 125% tariff on U.S. goods. However, the Chinese government stated that it would not back down or continue participating in the tariff escalation. China explained that the current tariff levels have already surpassed what is acceptable and have negatively impacted bilateral trade. It emphasized that further tariff increases would not improve the situation, but would only make trade relations between the two nations more unrealistic. China is now looking to shift towards diplomatic measures and dialogue, but insists that the terms of the trade agreement need to change in order to reach a long-lasting and fair resolution. Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke out about the trade war with the U.S., asserting that China would not succumb to suppression and would not make concessions in this confrontation. His statement came shortly after the U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese goods and threatened to escalate its retaliatory measures. President Xi emphasized that China has developed independently for over 70 years and does not need help or preferential treatment from any other nation. He firmly stated that China would not yield to external pressure, reinforcing that the country will maintain its stance and continue to develop in its own way, unaffected by outside measures. U.S. President Donald Trump has also expressed his willingness to work with China to find a solution to the trade dispute. However, with China's firm stance, achieving a resolution may prove to be even more challenging. Simultaneously, China issued a travel advisory for its citizens traveling to the U.S. The advisory urges Chinese nationals to carefully assess the risks before planning trips to the U.S. and encourages cautious travel. This not only affects tourists, but also impacts Chinese students studying in the U.S. The warning could lead to a reduction in the number of Chinese visitors to the U.S., which would significantly affect the tourism industry and trade activities between the two countries. China currently holds approximately $760 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds, making it one of the largest creditors of the United States. This provides China with a powerful tool to pressure the U.S. economy should it choose to sell off these bonds. While this is a double-edged sword, as selling U.S. debt would also have negative consequences for China, it could still be used as strategic leverage in the trade war. However, China is fully aware that such a move could pose significant risks to its own economy, and thus, it will carefully consider this action before proceeding. The outcome of this escalating trade conflict remains uncertain, but China's firm responses and strategic preparations indicate a determination to stand its ground in the face of increasing pressure from the United States.